So today I want to unpack the prompt for the individual oral and unpack some of the assumptions that underlie that prompt. So the prompt: examine the ways in which the global issue of your choice is presented through the content and form of one of the works and one of the bodies of work that you have studied. Now, by now, this is a very familiar prompt to you, but I want you to note that this is a question of how. Examine the ways in which. Ways is plural. That means there's going to be multiple answers. Now, examine the ways in which the global issue of your choice. And I think it's important to note that your choice here will matter. That's why you're given a choice. Your choice will matter. Think independently. Think boldly. Think about the implications of your choice. And that word implications is in the criteria. Your choice is presented through the content and form. Now, we've done a lot with content and form. We assume there's a relationship between content and form. Often the form reinforces the content, but there are situations in which the form can actually subvert that content. Remember, your job is to examine this carefully, closely. And that sort of takes us back to the beginning. Examine. The prompt starts with the word examine. Now, that's an IB command term. When students think about exams, they imagine questions that they are asked to answer, questions they're supposed to answer. But here it's your job to question, to inquire, or as the IB Learner Profiler says, to be an inquirer. Literary versus non-literary. By this point in the course, you have encountered multiple examples of both kinds of texts. At one level, the task of the IA is assessing your recognition of the difference. What is the difference between art and propaganda, between an advertisement and an installation? These questions become philosophical very quickly. I submit that our main concern, though, is with function. How do these texts, whether literary or non-literary, function in the real world? Creators create with purpose. Creators make choices with regard to content and form, and these choices are informed by purpose. It may be that one crucial difference between a literary and a non-literary text is that of audience. Who is exposed or chooses to be exposed to these texts? Who is open to the function or the author's purpose for that text? When our audience is more sensitive to the subtleties and the nuance, does the audience actually have a choice? And more broadly, sort of what is the role of audience when we're talking about these different kinds of texts? The last word of the prompt, studied. Here we come to something essential. The idea is that through inquiry, open-mindedness, and study, you become more knowledgeable about the choices creators make with regard to content and form. Knowledgeable, knowledge understanding, criterion A. Here's your chance to demonstrate that learning. Really, this is a question of critical as well as creative thinking. You should think flexibly. You should apply the methodologies you learn in the course and the concepts you learn in the course independently, right? You shouldn't just repeat back something you read online or that you heard your teacher say or your peers say. This is not work you should Google. Remember, the examiner also has access to Google. This is your chance really to think carefully and think critically and think independently. Finally, global issue. All these essays and video essays coming out right now in the New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, in which commentators are reading Camus' work, The Plague, from 70 years ago in light of the current pandemic we find ourselves in. That's the kind of thinking you want to do. You can demonstrate your understanding that the meaning of a text is not fixed in space and time, but that interpretive communities have a role to play in constructing that meaning through your choice of global issue. So, in the end, think critically, think creatively, think independently, think carefully, and think conscientiously. Ultimately, this is a question of thinking.